Right now, while you're watching this video, the United States government is going deeper into debt. Not by the minute, by the second. As of this month, America's national debt has crossed $39.8 trillion. That number is so large your brain physically can't hold it, so let's shrink it down. If the government paid off $1 every single second, non-stop, day and night, it would take over 2 million years to clear it. And here's the part almost nobody's talking about. The thing everyone's excited about right now, artificial intelligence, is quietly making that number grow faster than at almost any point in American history. Not someday. Right now, in 2026. This isn't a video about robots taking your job. This is a video about who pays for the biggest infrastructure build-out in American history and why the answer might be you, whether you've ever touched an AI chatbot or not. Let's break down exactly how this works. First, let's get everyone on the same page, because debt gets thrown around so much on the news that it's lost all meaning. The national debt is what the government owes after decades of spending more than it collects in taxes. Every year it runs a deficit, spends more than it takes in, and that gap gets added to the pile. In just the last 12 months, the debt grew by roughly $2.9 trillion. That's not a typo. That's almost $8 billion a day, about $92,000 every single second. Per person, every American is sitting on about $114,000 of federal debt right now. Per household, nearly $290,000. You didn't sign up for that loan. Nobody asked you. But it's yours anyway. Because eventually, someone has to pay the interest. And that's the part that should actually worry you, not the total, the interest. The U.S. pays an average rate of about 3.4% on all of that debt. That sounds small until you realize 3.4% of $40 trillion is over $1.3 trillion a year just in interest. Not roads, not schools, not healthcare, just the cost of owing money. Interest payments now eat up close to 14% of the entire federal budget, and that share is projected to keep climbing every year through the end of the decade. Here's the trap. Once interest gets that big, the government has to borrow more money just to pay interest on money it already borrowed. It's the federal version of only making the minimum payment on a credit card, except the card is the size of the U.S. economy. For years, economists have debated whether this actually matters. Some say debt is fine as long as the economy grows faster than the debt does. Others say we're approaching a point where rising interest costs start crowding out everything else: infrastructure, defense, social programs, because the interest bill alone becomes unavoidable. What almost nobody predicted is the specific thing about to pour gasoline on that fire. It's not a war. It's not a pandemic. It's a data center. 4 companies alone, Google, Amazon, Meta, and Microsoft, are spending roughly $720 billion this year building the physical infrastructure behind artificial intelligence. Add OpenAI, Oracle, and the rest of the industry, and total AI infrastructure spending is on pace for $700 billion to $1 trillion a year within the next few years. That money isn't going into software. It's going into concrete, steel, silicon, and electricity massive data centers, some the size of small cities, packed with the chips that power AI models. And this is where the connection to America's debt becomes impossible to ignore. Here's the mechanism, in 3 parts. First, AI is fueling inflation, and inflation makes debt more expensive. To build this many data centers this fast, tech companies are buying up an enormous share of the world's supply of memory chips, processors, and construction materials. When demand for something spikes that hard, prices go up for everyone, not just the tech companies. Economists are now openly saying AI infrastructure spending is a real, measurable contributor to 2026 inflation, on top of everything else pushing prices higher. Why does that matter for the debt? Because when inflation rises, the Federal Reserve typically responds by keeping interest rates higher for longer. and the U.S. government has to refinance trillions of dollars of debt every single year. When rates stay elevated because of inflation that AI spending is partly fueling, the government's own borrowing costs climb right along with it. It's a feedback loop. AI spending pushes prices up, prices staying up keeps rates up, and higher rates make the national debt more expensive to service. Second, AI is driving up electricity prices, and that's a hidden tax on every American household. Data centers are power-hungry in a way most people don't grasp. A single large AI data center can use as much electricity as a mid-sized city. U.S. Data center electricity demand has roughly doubled in just 3 years and is projected to keep climbing sharply through 2030. Utility companies are now planning to spend over $1.4 trillion upgrading the power grid just to keep up, and a huge chunk of that cost doesn't stay with the tech companies. It gets passed straight to ratepayers, meaning ordinary households, through rate hikes. Residential electricity prices are already projected to rise over 5% this year alone, on top of a roughly 40% increase since 2021. Some analysts project electricity bills could climb another 15 to 25% by 2030 because of AI-driven demand. Goldman Sachs has explicitly said this will reduce disposable income and slow consumer spending, hitting lower-income households the hardest, since electricity eats up a bigger share of their budget. This isn't a tax bill from Congress. Nobody voted on it. But functionally, it works exactly like one. Money is pulled out of your pocket to subsidize infrastructure that, right now, primarily benefits a handful of trillion-dollar companies. Third, and this is the part that connects most directly to the $40 trillion figure, governments at every level are handing out enormous tax breaks and subsidies to get these data centers built in their backyard. States and local governments are competing with each other, offering AI companies property tax exemptions, sales tax exemptions on equipment, and long-term tax abatements that can run into the billions of dollars per project, all in the name of attracting jobs and investment. Here's the problem. Many of these facilities, once built, don't actually employ that many people. A data center that costs a city hundreds of millions in foregone tax revenue might create only a few dozen permanent jobs to run it. That's revenue that would have gone toward local budgets and schools, missing at exactly the moment government needs every dollar it can get to slow the growth of that $40 trillion pile. Zoom out, and the shape becomes clear. AI spending pushes up inflation. Inflation keeps interest rates elevated. Elevated rates make the national debt more expensive. Electricity costs rise and squeeze consumer spending, and tax incentives drain revenue from the governments trying to manage all of it. None of this is hypothetical. It's happening in 2026 right now, while the AI industry keeps telling us it's about to transform the world for the better. To be fair, the argument in favor of all this spending isn't crazy. The people building this infrastructure argue that AI will eventually boost productivity so much that it grows the entire economy more output, more tax revenue, more than enough to justify the cost. If AI genuinely makes workers and businesses dramatically more productive, that growth could, in theory, help shrink the debt as a share of the economy over time, the same way past technological booms did. But here's the catch nobody wants to say out loud. That outcome is a bet, not a guarantee. And it's a bet with a very specific timing problem. The costs, the inflation, the electricity bills, the tax breaks, the higher interest rates are happening now, in 2026, verified by real government data. The payoff, the productivity boom that's supposed to justify all of it, is theoretical and years away, if it happens at scale at all. Some economists are already warning about a potential AI investment bubble, where companies are spending money faster than the technology is actually generating usable economic returns. If that bubble deflates before the promised productivity gains show up, you're left holding the costs with none of the benefits. Look at the railroad boom of the 1800s. Enormous amounts of capital poured into track that never got used, and a wave of railroad companies went bankrupt when the promised traffic didn't materialize fast enough to cover the debt. Or look at the dot-com bubble in 2000. Billions were spent laying fiber optic cable and building companies on the promise that the internet would immediately transform commerce. The internet did eventually transform commerce, but not before trillions of dollars in market value were wiped out, and not on the timeline anyone was promising investors in 1999. The technology was real. The timing of the payoff was wrong. That gap between this will work eventually, and this works right now, is exactly where fortunes get destroyed and bills get left unpaid. AI may well follow that same pattern, genuinely transformative, but not on the schedule the spending suggests. The difference is who's exposed. In the dot-com era, it was mostly private investors and shareholders who ate the losses when the timing didn't work out. This time, because so much of the infrastructure is being financed through public subsidies, utility rate hikes, and a federal government that keeps adding to an already enormous debt regardless of the outcome, the exposure isn't limited to people who chose to invest. It's spread across everyone who pays a power bill or owes money at a rate the Fed sets. There's one more wrinkle that makes this different from past tech booms like the railroads or the internet. Those technologies were largely built with private capital taking the risk. This one is being built with an enormous amount of public support, baked in subsidized electricity infrastructure, tax abatements, and a federal government that has shown little appetite for reining in deficit spending regardless of which party is in charge. The public isn't just watching this bet from the sidelines. The public is quietly co-signing it. So let's bring this back down from the trillion-dollar abstractions to your actual life, because that's where this stuff really lands. If you pay an electricity bill, you are already helping fund the AI build-out, whether you use AI tools or not. That's not a maybe. Utility rate cases tied to data center demand are being approved right now, in state after state. If you hold any debt tied to interest rates, a mortgage, a car loan, a credit card, elevated interest rates driven partly by AI-fueled inflation make that debt more expensive to carry, for longer than it would otherwise be. If you rely on local government services, schools, roads, police, parks, tax abatements handed to data centers in your area can mean less revenue for the things you actually use day to day, even as your community gets told a giant new facility is bringing investment. And at the broadest level, if you're planning for retirement, saving for your kids' education, or just trying to build wealth over the next 20 years, the growth of the national debt matters to you, because eventually someone pays it down through higher taxes, reduced government benefits, or a weaker dollar that erodes the value of what you've saved. AI spending isn't the only reason the debt is growing. But it is, right now, one of the fastest growing new pressures on top of a debt load that was already unsustainable before AI ever entered the picture. None of this means AI is worthless or that the technology won't eventually deliver real value. It very well might, but might eventually is doing a lot of work in that sentence. And the bill for right now is already showing up in your electricity statement and your government's balance sheet. Here's the uncomfortable truth at the center of all this. America's debt problem was never going to be solved by one dramatic event. It was always going to be the slow accumulation of 100 decisions like this one: subsidize this industry, keep rates here, spend on this instead of that, each one individually defensible and collectively catastrophic. AI isn't uniquely evil in this story. It's just the newest, biggest example of a pattern that's been playing out in Washington for decades. Spend now, worry about the bill later, and hope the next generation of taxpayers, or the next breakthrough technology, figures out how to pay for it. The difference this time is scale and speed. No previous technology has demanded this much capital, this much electricity, and this many public subsidies in this short a window of time. Whether that turns out to be the smartest investment America ever made, or one of the most expensive gambles in its history, is going to depend on whether the productivity gains actually show up, and on whether anyone in Washington is willing to have an honest conversation about who pays for the years in between. That conversation isn't happening yet. Which means, for now, the answer to who pays for AI is the same as it's always been for America's debt. Everyone, a little bit at a time, whether they agreed to it or not. If this connected dots you hadn't seen put together before, that's exactly what this channel is for, breaking down the parts of the economy that get talked about separately on the news, but actually move together behind the scenes. If you want to understand exactly how much of your own money is already tied up in interest rates, inflation, and decisions being made in Washington without your vote, subscribe, because this is only going to accelerate from here. And if you think someone in your life needs to see how their electricity bill connects to a $40 trillion number they've never really understood, send them this video. I'll see you in the next one.